What I thought I'd do is make this more of a chatty video and show you a few examples of the paintings that I do. I almost always use the same palette: cerulean blue, ultramarine blue, raw sienna, burnt sienna, black and cream. So as I go through these videos, I'll try and explain a little bit more to sort of improve your art. I use a lot of texture paste. I've used it in this painting here. You can see the painting has also been varnished. It does add a lot to your painting. The texture paste that I use is usually just ordinary decorator's filler, and I let that dry overnight so it goes rock hard. You've got to have it really hard, because if you don't, the the moisture in your paint, your acrylics, will wet it and make it soft and useless. So that's what I do. This is a classic example here of my process. So I start by doing the sky really dark. You can use whatever you like. I use a dark purple, I use dark browns, I use the burnt umber, use all kinds of things. And then I introduce the lights on top of that. And what I do is I introduce the lights, but I leave the dark showing through in places. And then, as you can see, by the time you start introducing some lights into the sea, i.e. the surf, it starts to come together. Then what I usually do is I get that to a point where I like it. And then what I do is I just put some highlights to the edges of the cloud using a lighter cream, sometimes white. And here's another little tip. What I usually do is the white that I am going to use for my surf, sometimes the white that I use in the foreground as well, but I leave it out overnight. I put it on a paper plate and put a paper plate over it so that it's not quite airtight, but it's, and it goes really, really thick. And I use that as my surf. And I might do 3 or 4 coats of that over the surf. And it's very raised so that with the finished painting, you can feel that it is really raised, and it gives the impression of a real surf, standing out, proud from the painting. Another tip, don't be afraid to use your fingers. I use my fingers for blending in, I would say at least 50% of the paintings that I do, if not more. And I use a palette knife to put in the yachts. Just a very fine, small palette knife. And you'll see here that I'm using my fingernail to put in some birds, because you get a much finer line if you do that. And after all, it's an impressionist painting. It's not meant to be, super realistic. And I usually put in the dark first, like a black, and then let that dry, and then go over with cream or white, and leaving some black exposed, when I'm doing the birds. And I also do a lot of my paintings on thick cardstock. And obviously then they have to be framed. But what I find is the texture of the cardstock enables me to get really lovely effects. The paint, when it's layered, like I do, lots and lots of layers, the paint goes buttery and creamy, like oil paints, and it gives a completely different look to the painting, than it does on canvas. Canvas is very nice, but if I'm honest, I would prefer to paint on the card because of the effects that I get. So in case I haven't mentioned it before, all the colours that I use, every single colour on every single painting, I mix the colours. I don't just use colours from a tube, like a blue, straight onto the painting. I always mix it with something. You can probably see that I do that. So I hope you've got some tips and tricks. Hope you enjoyed it. And for now, I'm going to say bye. And as always, love from Cornwall.